Okay, it is December 17th, 2016, and we are here with Harold White, and we have created some questions for him to answer. This is your life, and it's a series of questions that really we're going to get into him and his family and things that he's remembered in the past. So with no further ado, let's get underway here. Harold White, why did your parents select this name for you?
That's an interesting question because I have a name that no one other that I know of has that name except my grandfather. And I wonder if you can guess what the L stands for in my name.
You know, I'm going to say, just a pure guess, I'm going to say Leonard.
No.
I'm going to say Larry.
No, and you can guess, but you'll never guess it.
Okay.
It's different. It's called Lovick. Lovic. Harold Lovick White.
Wow, that is very interesting.
And it's my grandfather's first name.
Okay.
His name was Lovick Franklin White.
Wow, that is very interesting. Okay, so did you have a nickname growing up?
I had to carry a nickname. My nickname was Hal, H-A-L, and sometimes, I had a neighbor here in Kaysville who called me one day and he says, "My name is Harold White." He says, "I'm getting your mail. I want you to change your name." I said, "What do you mean change my name?" I said, "I'm not about to change my name." I said, "My name is Harold L. White, and yours is just Harold White. Mine is unique, and that's one I'm going to have and I'm going to keep. So you got to suffer through it."
That is funny. So, can I call you Harold or Hal?
Hal.
Okay, Hal. So, Hal, when and where were you born?
I was born in a little town, Trenton, Utah. In fact, where I was born, there is now the house that I was born in, sits in the barnyard of that farm. It's like a chicken house now, but it was a small, two-story home with only 2 bedrooms upstairs and two rooms downstairs. But it's interesting because I look at that and I think, how in the world did we live with all the children in that little house? Because it was small.
Wow.
I remember one day getting up in the morning, and I couldn't see. I couldn't figure why, and I felt my way downstairs and told Mom, "Mom, I can't see. What's wrong?" And my eyes had slept over with sleep.
Oh no.
And I couldn't open my eyes. And wow. I thought I was blind for a bit.
Wow. So that's where you were born. When were you born?
August the 20th, 1929.
Wow.
And I caused the Great Depression in 29. They had the World Depression in 29.
Yeah, right.
Well, it happened in October. I was born in August. I caused the Depression.
How did your family come to live there? What were the events leading up? Do you know why your family decided to live there?
Yes, the farm that we lived on was part of a family farm, and my dad farmed with some of the family there, farmed there in Trenton. There were several farms involved, and my dad helped farm all of them, and they helped farm his farm.
Wow.
But it was a interesting thing. I had an Aunt Fern who lived across the road from me. I remember one time we had milk cans. And the truck would come along and pick up your milk cans and leave you clean, empty cans. Well, my mom said, Hal, go get the cream can off the road. Well, I went to get the cream can off the road, and my little cousin, who was just a couple of years older than I, wouldn't let me have that can. And so I went back and told Mom, I said, he won't let me have it. And my brother Rex said, oh, yes, he will. You go back there and get that can. If you have to whip that kid, you're going to get that can. I had to whip that kid to get that can.
Wow.
That's my brother. He said, you're not going to be a wimp. You're going to fight for what's right.
Wow.
So I had to fight to get that milk can.
Okay, that is funny. So you kind of mentioned that house, and how many, do you remember things like how many rooms it had? Did it have electricity, indoor plumbing, telephones? What kind of amenities? Kind of talk about that house and what it had.
Telephones were a thing in the future. Didn't have such a thing. Electricity, yes. But running water, no. We had to bring water from a well.
There's our
And the
graduating
restroom was an outdoor john. Have you heard of those? Of course, you know what that is.
Yes.
But that's what we had.
We're talking like an outhouse?
Yes, an outhouse.
Okay.
There was 2 rooms upstairs, small rooms, sleeping rooms, and I think 3 rooms downstairs. One was a kitchen and a small area where we kind of a living room, and then a bedroom for my parents. That was the house. It was kind of a
there that I did.
tall, narrow kind of a building.
She was my supervisor.
I don't know how to describe it other than to say that
3 here.
now it's serving its purpose as a chicken coop.
Wow. That is amazing. So, can you describe the personalities
On my first
of your
flight
family
with me.
members back then? Do you remember some of the ways
Oh,
their
yes.
personalities?
Yes.
And we used
Very differently. My brother Alma was
to feed passengers meals.
a meek person who was
Don't do that anymore, but
there was a fight, he'd be the arbitrator.
while we were taking
And my brother Rex, who was next in line, he'd be the one to do the
all
fighting.
the people
In fact, he fought professionally.
down where they were going.
And
And I circled where they were going.
as I understand it,
Tell the passengers.
he fought with a guy one time
I didn't give them all
and
the
hit him
meals.
so hard, the guy almost died.
We didn't have enough
And that, he said, that's enough for me. I'll not fight anymore.
so bad
So he quit.
about that.
But my sister, Winna,
We had
Was,
fed meals all the time I was born.
the queen of the house, she took over when my mother died when I was 6 years old. Took care of me and
It was so small.
my little sister.
Park my car and just walk out to the terminal,
And my brother Alma
right through the terminal to the
had not gotten married when my mother died. But he was planning on getting married. And so I said, no, I won't get married. I'll take care of the family. And my dad said, no, you go ahead and get married. And I'm glad he did, because over the period of the next couple of years, part of the time I lived with Alma and his wife, Naomi, and part of the time I lived with my grandfather White, Ludwig Franklin White and Matilda Gertrude White. And I enjoyed, I can't say I enjoyed one more than the other, but I enjoyed both of them. I have fond memories of my times with both.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, and you really have a soft place in your heart for your brother Alma John. What are some of the things that you remember that he'd done for the family, and just his personality and attributes?
Well, as I mentioned to you, he was going to put off his marriage to be able to take care of the family after my mom died. And my dad said, "No, you go ahead and get married." And that was just Alma's attitude for his life. And for him and I and our relationship, I was only about 4 and 5 years old when he was out irrigating on the farm. And wherever Alma went, I went with him. I was on his shoulders or by his side almost all the time. So him and I have a very special relationship. He was my idol in growing up. Even when I didn't live with him, I just knew the kind of a person he was. Of course, I have to say that my sister Winna was the same kind of a person.
Mm-hmm.
My brother Joe did a unique thing in our family. He married his stepsister, Algie. Algie was a daughter of my stepmother, and they got married. And I don't remember how long they were married, but they ended up in a divorce. Now the family kind of somehow seemed to ostracize Joe because of that. And he just wasn't close to the family. And yet he wasn't far away, but he just felt the family ostracized him, and he didn't want to be any part of that. Now my little sister Sarah Lou, I left California and went to stay with my brother Alma up in Parma, Idaho. And lived there in Parma until I was about 17 years old and went back to California to see my dad. And they had put my little sister, Sarah Lou, in a rest home for girls. And I told my dad, I said, "Let me take Sarah Lou with me. Go back, and I'll take care of her." But my stepmother wouldn't let that happen. And I've always held that against her, because I believe I could have saved Sarah Lou from a lot of heartache. Because I was far away from the church, and she was. And not to her detriment, because it wasn't her fault. She just didn't have anybody to hold on to. I had either Rex or Alma to hold on to as a part of the family. So I had an advantage over Sarah Lou. And I've always regretted that I didn't get to take Sarah Lou back to California with me that time.
Mm-hmm. Do you, what was school like for you as a child, growing up? What are your memories of school?
I don't have very many memories of elementary school. I really don't remember much about that at all, except we used to have to ride a bus. Had a bus to school, to and from. But I remember when I was a junior in high school, I found a job out in Walnut Creek, California, on a ranch working for my room and board and what wages I could earn. I and 3 French boys, 3 brothers, did the same thing. We all worked on that farm, rode the bus to school, worked in the kitchen in the mornings before the bus went to help the cook, set tables and do dishes and that sort of thing. Go to school, come home and do that again to help the cook. On Saturdays and Sundays, we pruned trees to earn whatever money we had available to us. But that was my year in Acalanes High School, out in near Walnut Creek, California. Then when I was a senior, I went back to Idaho, where Alma was, and went to senior year in high school in Parma, Idaho, in Parma High. And I was not a good student, but I enjoyed school because I played football, I played basketball, and I made the starting 5 in both. Starting elements in both football and basketball. So I enjoyed that my senior year in high school. But those times, they had a harvest vacation where they would shut the schools down, high schools at least, for a couple of weeks during harvest time to let the boys help their parents on the farm. And I got a job topping sugar beets, and earning money to go. And I stayed out, but instead of staying out just 2 weeks, I stayed out about a month and a half, working to get money to buy clothes for me, because that's the only way I had to get clothes. But I went behind by enough credits that I couldn't make them up by the time I was through my senior year in high school. So I lacked about 3 credits of graduating from high school.
So who were your heroes back then? Did you have any heroes that you really looked up to?
Well, I remember it wasn't somebody I knew, but it was somebody I did look up to as kind of a hero. St. Mary's College is out there by Walnut Creek, and the ranch I worked on was right next to the St. Mary's College. And in 1947. No, 46. 46. They had a football player called Herman Wiedemeyer, who was an All-American running back for St. Mary's College that year. And of course, I always idolized him because I played football too. He was one of my heroes.
Okay. So, growing up, we'll still stay in the school years. Growing up, talk about your faith and your religion and how you were introduced to that and a little bit in that area.
Well, I was introduced, of course, as a child. My parents introduced me to the gospel, and I never did get too far away from that. Give you an instance. When I was a senior in high school in Parma, Idaho, we had to build a new chapel for the church there. And in those days, people were assessed so much per family or per individual for their share of the cost of building that chapel. I remember that I was 18 years old and I was assessed $500 to be assess my assessment on that chapel. So I went to the contractor. I said, "Look, I need work. Let me work for you." He said, "Okay, you can work for me, but," he says, "we'll give you $1 an hour, but you have to contribute 50 cents of that dollar towards your assessment. So I worked off my $500 assessment at 50 cents an hour and got my 50 cents for my spending money. That was my assessment when I was 18 years old.
Wow. And that was a standard practice that the church did for all members.
Oh, that was a standard practice, yeah. Yeah. Some families had to pay $1,000, $1,200. And poor people who were scratching and scraping to try to make ends meet would still have to come up with that kind of assessment.
Right. Wow. Did you ever go on family trips as a child? And what were some of your favorite memories and favorite trips that you went on?
I don't remember family vacations. As such, we just didn't have family vacations. But I do remember when we left Utah, we left the Zion Park area of the church to go to California to work in Richmond, California at the Kaiser shipyards. My dad, Brother Joe, and Brother Rex all got jobs in the Kaiser shipyards. So we moved out to California. I remember on the way, my dad always had an old truck. That was the way he made everything he did for the family. He had to have a truck. But on the way out there, we had a trailer behind that truck. And I remember a tire blew out. It must have had a cut 6 inches long alongside the sidewall of that tire. And my dad looked at things and he said, I don't know how to fix this. But he took out his pocket knife and he drilled holes along the side of where the tire had blown out. And then he took his bootlace out of his boots and laced that tire back together with his bootlace and pumped it up with a hand pump, and down the road we went with that tire hand laced together with a bootlace.
Wow. Wow.
I'll never forget that.
Yeah, that is something. So, talk a little bit, where and when did you get married?
I got married on May 17th. 1948. I married a girl by the name of Marjorie Ballard. Her father was a farmer there in Parma. And her and I went together when I was a senior. And then when I waited a year after I got out of high school, then she graduated from high school, and then we got married. My brother Alma was the best man at the wedding, and the wedding was held on the lawn. Her father's name was Alan Ballard, and out on the lawn at his house was a ceremony for our wedding ceremony.
And that was in what city?
That was in Parma, Idaho.
Parma, Idaho.
Not a city; it's just a small town.
Okay. Okay. And then you were fortunate to get married again, weren't you?
Well, I was married for 8 years. And in that time, we had moved from Parma over to a place called Nessa, Oregon. And I moved over there because I had gotten a job working for Amalgamated Sugar Company. Had a sugar factory, and I got a job working for them, which paid me good wages. But she decided she wanted to go to work as a telephone operator. And I remember now, and I didn't at the time understand what was going on, but I remember now that sometimes she'd have to have one night a week where she had to go out her night out with the girls. Well, I found out later, night out with the girls was a night out with some boys too. So our marriage we moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, but that's where the marriage ended. It's up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I was a lumberjack up in Coeur d'Alene. I fell trees, like you talk about a lumberjack falling. I hooked logs on what we call a jammer, where you skidded the logs up into a pile at the side of the road. I did that. And I remember that in falling trees, I was good enough that I could fall about as many logs, or cut as many logs in a day as any sawyer they had. And sometimes I was getting 40 cents a log. 40 cents for a long log. A long log was 33 feet long. And I got 40 cents for cutting that log and cutting it up and limbing it. They gave me 40 cents. And I remember the days that I earned $100 with my chainsaw. So I had cut and limbed over 200 of those 33-foot logs.
Wow. And then there came a day when you met a very special young lady. And
Well, I had 2 children from that first marriage. My oldest was named Ralph James White. And I might say that today and this time, him and I are very close. We get emails back and forth from one another almost every day. My daughter from that marriage is 4 years younger, and she won't have anything to do with me, which is very, very sad to me. But I was living in Spokane and Coeur d'Alene, between the two places, and taking my children to church on Sunday. And I remember each Sunday I'd go take them up to junior Sunday school and up on the upper level of the chapel. And I wait for them to come back down after that junior Sunday school. But while they were in junior Sunday school, I went into the gospel doctrine class. And the gospel doctrine class had a man teaching who was so good at making the gospel meaningful in your life. His name is David Julius Nowak. And his wife was Mary Nowak. But I remember one time I was waiting for my children to come down from the junior Sunday school. And one time in the back of this, in the sacrament meeting, in the back of the sacrament meeting, I was there, but I didn't have my children were, I think, still in up in the junior Sunday school. But I was sitting in the back row, and there were 2 ladies there. They had 2 small boys, and those boys were clambering over their laps and so forth, and I end up had one of the boys even in my lap. And he was like little boys, 1.5 years, 2 years old were, slobbering and worrying about drooling on my suit. And this one lady was concerned about that, and it wasn't bothering me because I'd had that happen before, but with my own children. But I knew that she was a daughter of David Julius Nowak, and that day I resolved that I was going to call and get a date with her. But I didn't call until I think it was about Tuesday or Wednesday, and she had already come back to Salt Lake City to her job. And her mother said, "Well, she's not here," but she says, "I'll so she's back to her job in Salt Lake." Well, I didn't see that lady again until about 3 or 4 months. And then one day there she was again. And I said to her father, I said, "I see your daughter's here again." He said something about, the airlines were on strike because the mechanics were striking, so she couldn't work. She was a stewardess for Western Airlines. And then, while I was waiting for my children to come downstairs, her mother came to me and said, "Brother White, do you have a place to go for dinner today?" And I told a lie because I was supposed to go out with my children's mother and have dinner with them. But I said, "No, I don't." And so she invited me to dinner. And I started dating Glenna Nowak at that time. And I dated her. At that time, I was not a lumberjack. I was driving truck for Grant Construction Company down by Moses Lake, Washington. And my shift was midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning. And I stayed in Spokane until just time enough for me to drive down and get in my shift at midnight. And I'd work Monday night and Tuesday night. Then Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, back to Spokane I went to see Glenna. Had a date with her for what time I could. Then back down to Moses Lake to drive my truck again. That's how I courted Glenna for about 2 months, I think, wasn't it, dear? I think it was about that long.
And so you dated her how long before you got married?
Well, I don't remember exactly the date when we first met. I don't remember that, but it must have been about March or April. And I proposed to her 2 weeks after I met her because I really knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, because I knew her parents and knew what they were like and what kind of people they were. And I knew what she would be like. So I wanted her to be my companion. So I proposed, but she said, "I can't give you an answer." And she explained to me that her patriarchal blessing told her that her and her companion had made a covenant before they came to this earth that they would be companions here. So, very shortly after that she had to go back to work in Salt Lake. So I had, it's just crazy, but I had told my boss before I left that weekend, I said, "I'm through, I'm quitting." I got to Spokane and Glenna told me that she had to go back to work. So I asked her dad, I said, "Can I take her back to Salt Lake?" He said, "If you drive straight through, yes, you can." So I drove straight through and brought Glenna back down to Salt Lake to go back to work for Western Airlines. Then decided I better find myself a job. And I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked for a couple of weeks. I finally ended up taking something that nobody else would take, and I was driving a taxi cab in Salt Lake. That taxi cab cost me $8 a day, plus I had to put all the gas in it that I used every day. And after I had put the gas in it and paid the $8 for the car, if I had $6 or $8 left, I was lucky. But that's what I did when I was courting Glenna.
Wow. And so you guys were married. What date and where were you married?
We were married on September the 23rd, 1958, in the Salt Lake Temple.
Okay. And how would you describe your spouse? And what do you admire the most about her? 2 questions.
What do I admire the most about her? Her beautiful spirit. She has what few people are gifted with, and that is the spirit of forgiveness. I don't believe I've ever had, in 58 years of marriage, I don't believe I've ever had a fight with her, because she won't do that. If there's a misunderstanding, an argument or something, she'll say, it's my fault. And so, she a spirit of forgiveness. And like I say, just a beautiful spirit.
Wow, that's nice. So, what do you believe the key to a successful marriage is? What is it?
Never forgetting how to say, I'm sorry. And talk about differences where you can reconcile any differences between the two of you by talking mutually, not accusingly, but reconciling without any accusations.
That's good counsel. So I'm going to let you, this will be a general question and you can go wherever you want with this, but what do your children mean to you?
That's almost indescribable. Glenn and I have 2 children. Both of them are adopted. And both of them came to us in very unusual circumstances. We had been to British Columbia moose hunting. Come back through Spokane, stopped to see Glenna's brother. And while we were there, I told Glenna, I want to call Dr. Knight, who was a doctor we had been to while we were living there, and see if he knew of any babies available for us to adopt. And I called him and he said, I told him who it was, and he said, you know, it's funny you'd call me, because he said, I have a girl who is supposed to have a baby within the next month. And I was supposed to find parents for that baby. He says, I neglected and I have not done it yet. And he gave me the name of an attorney. Said, you go see this man. He said, I'll call him and tell him you're coming. You go see him and talk to him. I went down and talked to that attorney, and we did everything right there, filling out all the adoption papers, with the exception of a name, because we didn't know whether it would be a male or female yet. And we then left Spokane, drove home, and I was working for Garrett Freight Lines down in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I answered the phone one morning, Garrett Freight Lines, and my brother Russell said on the phone, "Good morning, Papa." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You have a baby girl." Well, we put Glenna on a plane back to Spokane. So she went up there. When she was there with her brother for about 3 or 4 days, wasn't it, dear?
About the
About 3 or 4 days. And she got the baby. And then I remember distinctly, her parents went to the airport to pick her up when she came back to Albuquerque. And they brought Glenna and the baby down where I was working. And I'll never forget, Glenna held Alicia out the window of the car to me. That was my first time. It wasn't my first child. But somehow I remember that as a very moving experience for me. And then, about the time she was about 11, 12 months old, I got a call one morning as I was getting ready to go to work from a man named Miles Haven Romney, who was a counselor in the stake presidency. His daughter was a social worker in Gallup, New Mexico. He said, "My daughter said that she has a girl living with her who's going to have a baby in about a month, and said to her, you have to call your father and tell him to get the people who know who my baby's supposed to go to, so that they know and can get ready for it." He said, "I have been awake all night trying to think who that person was." And he says, "The only name that has come to me is you and Glenna." So I said, would you like to have another child? I said, "You better let me get Glenna on the phone." So I called Glenna. She was in the kitchen. I said, "Get on the phone." And we told him, yes, we sure would. But the interesting thing happened. We had put our name in down in an adoption agency in Albuquerque before we got Alicia. And after we got Alicia, they called one time and they said, "We have a baby for you." And so we told them, well, we already have a little girl who was not a year old yet. "Oh, well, then you can't have this little boy. You can't have him. We can't put that in with you." Then it's interesting to note that only about a month later, an attorney who was a member of our church, the church, who was handling the adoption for the baby over in Gallup, New Mexico, called me and said, "The baby was born last night. We need to go over and get the baby." It was about 3 days. So we went to Gallup with H. Vern Payne is his name. I'll never forget. He was an attorney handling the adoption for Stuart. We went over to Gallup, and we went to a parking lot, and we couldn't go into the hospital. But the attorney, Vern Payne, went in and brought the baby back out to us in the car. And that's how we got Stuart. So we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Alicia, the circumstances we got her, were so unusual that it just had to be. And the same thing with Stuart. The circumstances were so unusual that we know that Stuart had to be ours. There's no question in Clint and I's mind what they were meant for us.
That is amazing. So I have two more questions here, and then I think we're going to conclude this. But one of the questions is, what is the one thing that you want people to remember about Hal White?
You know, I struggle with something in my life. Sometimes I'm very assertive when I shouldn't be. I've tried to be. I would like to be known as someone who is humble and loved his Heavenly Father, and be grateful for all the blessings I've received over my life. For I don't believe I've deserved what I've received. I know that I can never, ever catch up to my Heavenly Father in my trying to be humble for the blessings that He's poured upon me in my lifetime.
That's a great answer. And the last question is this. You know, when we do recordings like this that are digitally mastered and put onto discs, they have the capability of lasting for years and years and years. So it's very possible, well, not only possible, but it is going to happen, I'm sure, that as we distribute these to all of these wonderful spirits, these young spirits that are on your wall, namely grandchildren and their children, what, understanding that they possibly could be listening to this, what would you say to them that you want them to remember about life and the important things that they need to do?
To remember that all gifts that we have in our lifetime come from God. No matter what our gifts may be, they're a blessing to us from our Heavenly Father. And whatever you attain in your life will be a blessing from your Heavenly Father. And you'll be blessed because of your obedience. Obedience is the number one, is the first law of heaven. And if you are obedient to your Heavenly Father, to your parents, and to those who may preside over you, you'll live a life that you'll always be proud of and be glad you had the blessings and the ability to receive the blessings our Heavenly Father has for you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the interview with Hal White. Thank you very much.
Thank you.